Traditional responses to the problem of poverty tend to fall into three basic categories. The first is the handout. This involves some kind of redistribution of income, whether it be through voluntary charity or taxation. The second approach is the hand up. This might include employment readiness programs and other efforts to help get people back on their feet without actually giving them money. The third approach is to withhold assistance. This is based on the belief that helping poor people teaches them dependence when they really need to learn self-reliance. Each of these approaches has its advantages and disadvantages, but none of them will actually solve the problem of poverty. That's because in all cases there is an underlying assumption of inequality. We assume that the poor are worse off and that the wealthy are better off. We see the poor as being less fortunate, and we reach down from a position of superiority. There is something that the poor need more than money or material security, and that is dignity. Dignity is feeling equal to one's peers. It's feeling useful, having a voice, and knowing that your talents and contributions are valued and accepted. Whether it's giving a hand out or a hand up, you can't help the poor by reaching down. The only way to really help is to live and work alongside others as equals. This is hard to do because separation is built into our economic system. The labor market is based on an assumption of scarcity. One person's success is a threat to another person's livelihood. Capitalism pushes workers toward specialization. Those in lucrative or respected positions tend to set up barriers to entry. They don't want others to obtain the position and status that they have. Because workers have to choose a specific career, they tend to gravitate toward those professions which will maximize income and minimize effort. The tendency is to elevate mental work and service-oriented professions while pushing menial labor as far away as possible. Those providing mental work consider their labor to be of great value, but they exchange the earnings from these intangible offerings for real, tangible goods. They think that they've earned their money, when in fact they are living off the labor of others. A person has status only when there is someone below. You can't be a manager without direct reports. You can't have first world countries without second and third world countries. Those who try to help the poor tend to do so from a distance. They might assume that the poor are guilty of something, perhaps laziness, a lack of intelligence, or maybe some kind of personality flaw. The wealthy don't recognize their role in creating poverty. They don't realize that they are suffering from the same flaws as the poor, but to a higher degree. The truth is that poverty exists because the poor have been left behind. Inner cities exist because the wealthy moved away to the suburbs. Poverty will end when everyone, both rich and poor, take upon themselves the responsibility of providing for their own material needs. This can't happen when there is a class of workers and a class of owners. We all must seek to become owners of productive capital, and having obtained ownership, we must work that capital directly. Ownership is individual, but it has a social component. As we accept the obligation to become owners, we must recognize that everyone else is under the same obligation. This fact needs to be reflected in the way we structure businesses. The first of the Rochdale cooperative principles is open and voluntary membership, meaning that everyone has the opportunity to become an owner and no one is excluded. Lots of companies offer employee stock ownership or some form of profit sharing, but that doesn't mean they have a culture of ownership. In order to truly apply the principle of ownership in a modern economy, we need to use business structures in which workers are actually running the company and electing its directors. Worker control of productive assets is the classical definition of socialism. But there is a big difference between ownership and socialism. Ownership means to accept benefits, such as profits, as well as responsibility and risk. A farmer planting crops has a right to the harvest, but that harvest is not guaranteed. He may lose his crops to disease, insects, bad weather, etc., but he must accept that risk. Socialism, by definition, means social ownership. The assets are owned by the group, not by individuals. The problem with this is that no one carries the responsibility. Control ends up floating up to the highest governing body. This is why socialism, despite the best of intentions, tends to concentrate power into the hands of the government, resulting in a loss of freedom. We can avoid this problem by applying the principle of subsidiarity. This means that activities are managed at the lowest level possible. If you can run a business as a self-employed individual, then you should do so. If a division within a large company can function on its own, then that division should be spun off as an independent company. The result of this approach is a network of tightly connected, worker-owned businesses. Control is hierarchical, but the power still originates from the bottom. Embracing ownership means focusing on productive assets and recognizing the value of technology. The pattern of innovation described by Clayton Christensen is real, but it is only beneficial to society when we own that innovation. Obtaining ownership always involves sacrifice and risk. To suggest otherwise is a denial of economic reality. Developing new tools and technology requires time which could have been spent earning a living. We sacrifice in the present in hopes that it will make us more productive in the future. This means that one's ownership stake must be purchased using surplus income, savings. This then begs the question, how can someone with no money and no savings ever become an owner? Part of the solution to this problem is the living wage. Workers need to earn enough through wage labor so that they can live within their means and have something left over. With that extra income, they can then purchase their ownership stake and thus secure their future. It's true that having higher wages will reduce the number of employees that each company can hire. But if a business cannot provide a living wage, then that business is not worth operating because it's not fulfilling its purpose. We need to focus on creating high-paying jobs so that more people can become owners. One way to free up cash flow in order to pay a living wage is to limit the salaries of the top earners in the company. This is not to create an equal distribution of income, but a more equitable distribution. When the Mondragon cooperatives first got started, they agreed on a wage differential of 3-to-1. So the highest paid worker earned no more than 3 times the income of the lowest paid worker. As the cooperatives grew into a large industrial complex, they found it difficult to retain executives who could earn much more elsewhere. So they loosened the policy somewhat, but the differential at Mondragon is still much smaller than that of the typical American corporation. There are other ways in which our society can apply the principle of ownership. In our next episode, we'll look specifically at the issue of debt and how the use of debt instead of ownership has affected the economy.